In between, we had other holidays as well. So it's been rather very I would say brisk work expected from entities. And therefore, we thought let's maybe do an immediate meeting to share our views with participants. I do understand that there are already 100 people in this meeting itself. And there is a large number perhaps in the waiting room, and therefore we have opened up a live streaming on YouTube. So if you're not able to, if you or your colleagues are not able to get part here, please proceed to YouTube Live. Let's proceed straight away, as there are limitations on time for me as well. I'll probably have to exit at 6:45 for sure. My colleagues might be there to share further thoughts with you all. I'll proceed straight away. So what is the genesis of this entire SDD? Is it something new? Is it 5th of August 2022 that the requirement of SDD has been launched by the stock exchanges? Surely not, as all of you are aware. It's been little over 2 years that the requirement was inserted by the PIT Amendment Regulations 2021, inserting regulations 3/5 and 3/6. 3/5 is the root of the entire concept of structured digital database, which of course was recommended by the Sondhi committee that it might be important for companies to maintain a trail of what was the sharing of information done, so that if at all investigation is later on done into breaches or apprehended breaches of insider trading, there is a trail. How was information passed on from who to who? We've seen in practice as well as several investigations over insider trading, which are launched by exchanges once in a while. There is a question as to who did you share the information to? So far, it was only incident-based probes by exchanges. If there is a sort of investigation into an allegation of insider trading by the exchanges against companies, companies were asked to provide the STD details. But a generalized mailer requiring all companies to provide a confirmation, and that too for the quarter of June 2022, is sort of, like I said, unprecedented, but nevertheless, well, it's only a pointer to what is the requirement. I mean, it's just a pointer to the seriousness of requirement. In our perception, it's not simply intended to hold companies on the wrong foot and hold them responsible for what they haven't done. That may be one part, maybe less important part, but the more important part is to sensitize companies on what they're required to do going forward. So the retrospect part is just one part. That's, like I said, that's not possibly the regulator's intent. The intent is to sensitize corporate governance officials as to what is the seriousness of the SDD, and therefore in what way it needs to be maintained in time to come. Before we get into the subject, I'll briefly say that this requirement of SDD in a particular format, this is not something which is globally found. SDD, by the word, insider trading regulations, I must say they differ from country to country. Every country has developed its own set of regulations. That's called differently. The jargon is not the same. The requirements are not the same across countries. So it's called by different names, but exact equivalent of structured digital database is not something that we could find, at least in insider trading regulations of other countries. There is a concept of insider list in the UK regulations. There's a similar concept in European Union regulations, but that's still somehow largely different from the requirement of SDD, which seems to have been suggested by Sondhi committee, possibly with the experience of investigations into insider trading into companies. Now, the immediate concern, which is what has driven 100 people into this event today, and that too with notice of just about 15 minutes, is the mailer dated 4th August from one of the exchanges, requiring companies to submit a quarterly compliance certificate on the letterhead of the company, certified by the compliance officer, giving a time frame of 5 days. 9th August, today is the date. Maybe after this meeting, you'll probably rush to fill and file your certification. I'm wondering in what way are we able to help you, or are we giving you a gyan which would be largely academic? But our objective, of course, is to discuss with you all to make it meaningful and practical, so that you can go ahead and give the necessary certification unless you've given it already. The mail relates to the quarter of June, and the quite queer part which is in the mail which is sounding very strange to us, is the note below the mail which says the attached certificate should cover events which have been disclosed by listed entity to the stock exchange, so that the secretarial auditor will not be exposed to OOPSI. I'm not sure what's the meaning of secretarial auditor not being exposed to OOPSI. I don't know where it comes from. What is the relevance of this to SDD? I don't even know. I don't even know whether the intent of regulations is that OOPSI should not be disclosed to secretarial auditor. That cannot be the intent. OOPSI is disclosed quite commonly to auditors. So I wonder why not to secretarial auditor. Secretarial auditor also gets to, get the information about what's happening in the company quite commonly. Secretarial auditors have access to minute books, audit committee minutes, board minutes. Therefore, they might have access to OOPSI as well. So I'm actually not sure of what could be the intent of inserting this note. Well, therefore, disregarding what this note says, we're going ahead and trying to understand what this mailer of the stock exchange actually entails. We are talking about the amendment regulation, 2020. I said earlier 2021, but 2020, 2 years ago. And then SEBI came with certain FAQs. SEBI FAQs on this particular part, SDD. We have our views on some of these requirements. So our views are a bit different. You are therefore absolutely free to go as SEBI expects. But our view also, we would like to explain with our fundamental reasoning as to why we say what we say. And let me just go ahead and talk about what exactly the regulatory backing first. Like I mentioned, regulation 3/5 and 3/6 essentially talk about the concept. 3/5 basically throws the requirement, and that's exactly reproduced on the right side, which says the board of directors of the organization of every is required, or the head of the organization of every person required to handle unpublished information. Let's read it in context of companies. The board of directors of every entity, every company, which is required to handle OOPSI, shall ensure that an SDD, a structured digital database, is so that's where it is. Structured SDD is maintained containing the nature of unpublished price sensitive information. Therefore, the keyword is OOPSI. It has to be sharing of OOPSI, and the names of such persons who have shared the information, and also the names of persons with whom the information is shared. The sharer and the sharee. The one who has passed the information outward, and the one who has received the information inward. That information needs to be contained along with the PAN number or other identifier. If the PAN number, normally speaking, if not, then in that case, other identifier, for example, the Aadhaar. Such database shall not be outsourced. That's one part. Shall be maintained internally with adequate internal controls and checks, such as time stamping and audit trail to ensure non-tampering of the database. Obviously, non-tampering is a very important part. We're talking about a sensitive field of OOPSI. If information could be tampered, then the very relevance of SDD will fall aside. So the question is, OOPSI is being shared by someone to someone. So the key question is, are we talking about OOPSI? So information in question must be unpublished price sensitive information. If you read the definition of unpublished price sensitive information in PIT regulations, once again, the definition of unpublished price sensitive information is something, and information is number one, unpublished. Number two, if published, it's expected to materially impact the prices of listed securities. Every information can have an impact on prices. I cannot think of any information in a company which is unrelated to prices. Price discovery in the market is composed of myriads of information which continue to happen on a momentary basis in every organization. So every information has a price relevance to prices. But the idea cannot be to list out all information. Therefore, OOPSI is defined as an information which may materially impact the prices. Material impact. My question is, what exactly is material? Is this materiality the same as enshrined in Regulation 30? I would say largely this is exactly material events or developments which might have impact on prices. Regulation 30 talks about such developments or intents to be tested for materiality. If they are indeed found to be material, they must be disclosed. So Regulation 30 is disclosure requirement. Disclosure is going from the company to the outside world, going from company to the exchanges, going from company to the public. Before it goes to the public, information obviously has traveled from a person to person, all within the system. That's so-called within the system, insiders passing on information to insiders, insiders passing on the information to an outsider. Information is still not gone public, but the information is such which, if made available generally, might have a material impact on prices. In that case, such journey of information, such trail of information going within the organization, that needs to be captured in the structured digital database. Now, there are some very important points here, and we'd like to, throw those points, of course. Like I said, on some of these points, our views are a bit different from those of SEBI. But let's understand at what stage do we need to capture this information. What we've noticed from the usual compliances done by many companies is that many companies regard only the information shared with auditors. Financial statements are shared with auditors. That they think is probably the only information which is requiring noting in the STT. Now, however, if you were to look at objectively, there are 3 stages of development of any information. What are the 3 stages? Number 1, the information arises or originates and not yet concretized. The information not still certain. Let's say the company is proposing an acquisition. Let's say the company is proposing a major expansion. The information is discussed in principle, either within the company or let's say at board of directors level. The information is not yet concretized because what all is needed to be done, let's say a board approval, let's say a due diligence, let's say a non-binding agreement, none of that have been done. It's still at proposal stage, but there is a proposal. At that stage, the information goes to some people. For example, let's say the information goes to a legal advisor. Let's say the information goes to a consultant who's supposed to do a DD. Let's say the information goes to a strategic advisor who's supposed to advise the company. The information may also be shared with, of course, the directors. So until now, the information is not in a shape at which it requires to be disclosed publicly, the information is not still concretized. Then comes the second stage. The information tends to or matures to a stage whereby one can say the probability of the information getting concretized now is higher than the information not getting concretized. For example, the acquisition proposal has gone to a stage where a non-binding term sheet has been agreed upon. Largely, the purchase consideration has been agreed upon. A final binding offer is not yet made, but the probability of the information getting concretized is higher than that of not getting concretized. That's stage 2. And stage 3, of course, the information is made public by way of a notification to the stock exchanges in terms of Regulation 30. Once the information has gone in public domain, it does not remain OPSI anymore because the information has now been publicized already. So the question is, if information is shared internally, shall we note it as a part of SDD at stage 1? Or shall we wait for stage 2 to happen? That is, the information has now become concretized. In our view, if you were to wait for stage 2 is actually the stage at which Regulation 30 will require the information to be put in public domain anyway. Because if the information is now looking more or less certain, it's not something which is a random probability. The probability of the information getting concretized is now higher than that of not being concretized. Of course, it's subjective call. The whole concept of materiality testing, the concept of testing, whether it should be disclosed to public, etc. All of these are subjective calls. Subjective calls have to be taken at every stage when it comes to insider trading. But companies would rather be advised to play with caution than to play with aggression. And therefore, if you think that the information is now tending towards getting concretized, that's the time the company should consider posting it as a Regulation 30 information. So at stage 2, it becomes ripe to be disclosed to public itself. However, before it gets disclosed to public, if the information is among certain insiders, in our view, that's the stage when it should be entered in SDD, because that's where a possibility of the information being misused is highest. Please appreciate the purpose of SDD is not to keep a dump of insider emails. The purpose of SDD is not to have a repository of internal emails. SDD is connected with a potential breach of insider trading regulations so that if at all a future investigation, if at all a future inquiry into insider trading is launched, by the exchanges or by SEBI. And if they ask a question, with whom was the information shared, we have a track. Even if that query comes 5 years later, and please understand, queries can come 4 years, 5 years later. SDD is to be maintained for 8 years. So at least for 8 years, you have this Damocles sword hanging on the head. The regulator might ask who was the, when was the information shared in practice? Also, we would have seen quite often. 2015, something was done, SEBI ask a question now. So there is no, as such, there's no concept of time limit. And that's a question before Supreme Court also in many cases. That's not the topic we're discussing today. The point I'm saying is that if even 3 years, 4 years, 5 years later, somebody asks, कि on 27 मार्च 2015 को आपने या 27 मार्च 2021 को आपने फला इंफॉर्मेशन स्टॉक एक्सचेंज में लॉन्च किया था, उसके पहले how was the information shared with whoever, we are able to track the SDD and able to say that this is how the information was shared with who all. Now, if the SDD is not properly maintained, who is responsible? Well, of course, Regulation 3 by 5 and 6 lay the responsibility on the board of directors, but surely the board of directors can hold the compliance officer responsible for that. So compliance officers need to have this serious burden that SDD is maintained for sharing of inside information. And in our view, even before the internal sharing of information, even before it's ultimately concretized, but there's a serious proposal which might result into a price sensitive information. That's the whole idea. Enter. Keep it in the STT. Now, the very important question is, and I'll talk about the manner of keeping STD in a minute from now. But first, very significant question is, you are sharing the information internally. Let's say the managing director is sending an email to CFO, or CFO is sending a mail to the CS, or CS is sending a mail, say, to the acquisition team. Acquisition sending a mail back to the managing director. Before any serious proposal, there might be a huge flow of mails internally between the officers of the companies. So are we meaning to keep track of all these internal emails between the designated persons of the company itself? This question was asked to SEBI, and SEBI's response is that even internal sharing of information is still to be kept in STT. Now, I have a little point to make here. Designated persons by law, by definition itself, are those supposed to have access to OPSI. I can think of sharing information to someone who is otherwise not supposed to have the information. For example, sharing the information to a consultant. Otherwise, the person is not expected to have the information. I'm sharing the information. I can share information with someone who is otherwise either not having it or not expected to have it. If someone is supposed to have the information in any case, for example, a DP, the whole definition of DP is somebody who, by virtue of his seniority or by virtue of his function, is supposed to have access to OPSI. The person has access to OPSI. What is the point in noting all these internal mails? CFO intimates that this year our turnover is reached whatever 500 crores. Well, the MD is anyway supposed to know it. So what is the point in internal flow of emails between the officers of the company being entered into STD? So our view is that while SEBI's response says internal sharing of mails also needs to be noted, we just want to say that this internal flow of mails is to be noted in STD only if the recipient is otherwise not expected to have the information. For example, let's say director operations is not expected to know what is happening in finance. Or let's say an independent director may not have information about what is happening in terms of strategic plans of the company, other than through a board meeting, of course. But before the board meeting, if an independent director has been brought into the loop or brought into the coterie of information, and a person has been provided information which is otherwise not expected to have or supposed to have, that is what is supposed to be entered in STD, not every internal flow of mails. That's one important point. Second important point is that the whole idea of STD is the trackability or traceability of information. Like I said, STD is not an exercise in vacuum. It is supposed to be able to trace or track information. If the tracing or tracking of information is otherwise, for example, notice the board meeting. Agenda papers are sent to directors along with several annexures. Annexures include the draft accounts of the company. Annexures include agenda items in the board meeting itself. The date of sending the notice to directors for a board meeting is anyways on record. What purpose will be served by entering such information in the STD as well? I have an information which is in form of notice of the board meetings. That's already a part of the records of the company. So I'm not sure if people were to advise every time a notice is sent to board meeting, including draft financial statements, enter in the STD. To my mind, it's perfunctory. So I would say the whole concept of SDD may not be rendered unfructuous into a perfunctory, redundant dump of information. It's an objective information. Context is potential inquiries or investigations to decide insider trading. That's the context. We should therefore try to relate it to context. Now comes a very critical question. In what form will the information be? In what form? That is it okay to keep it as an Excel file? Is it okay to keep it as a, Google Sheet or whatever the technical, potential forms of files? Or should we have a specialized software for keeping the STT? Many large companies have gone for external software solutions. For many medium and small companies, maybe a software solution may not be a workable or ideal exercise. So the question is it okay to keep the STD in form of an Excel sheet? Alexander Pope, famous English poet, question was asked, what is the ideal form of government? And equipped for forms of government, let fools contest. For forms of government, let fools contest. Whatever is best administered is best. Form doesn't matter. What matters is it the best way of administering? So for forms of SDD, let fools contest. Whatever is tamper-proof is best. I think the whole question is therefore, we're talking about the objectives of STD. And I think the objectives are very clearly stated in regulation 3/5 itself. Two things. Number one, it's a structured database. It's not unstructured. It's not, for example, haphazard, it's structured. Structure meaning there is a structure. Of course, dating is structure has to be date-wise. It's not completely a jumble of information. It's date-wise structure. Structure. Number two is a digital database, not physical database. So it's obviously digital information. And then it talks about two other features. Number one, date stamping. And number two, non-temperability. So if you are able to put date stamps, let's say by using DSC, and therefore you make it tamper-proof. But I don't know whether it's technologically, whether what I'm saying is correct or not, but technologically, if it's possible to make it tamper-proof. Audit trail actually means what? Wherever any overwriting or amending in Excel, for example, and I've in our FAQs, we recently posted, I think we posted today actually, we have given a link to a UK write-up also which says Excel is not, as such, Excel is not a good way because Excel does not ensure audit trail. Excel, if you overwrite something, it just overwrites the number. You don't know what was the number before that. So if you make it a track change and security protected file, or you could probably insert a macro which ensures that every time an edit is done, the details of editing are kept in the file itself. So with appropriate checks and balances, irrespective of the format of file, if you're able to keep an audit trail, which means information was entered, information later on was overwritten, what was the information before that, who overwrote it, and what was, when was it overwritten? If that part can be ensured in database, then the form of file probably will not matter. So I think at this stage, I will let my colleagues, Vinita and Pameen, whichever order they would like to speak, might take it over. Our objective today is to discuss and sort of have enough of interaction with all of you because I do believe all of you have your own experiences as well, and you would like to enrich everyone with your experience. But as I was mentioning, the intent of this mail of stock exchange for which time is ending today, 9th of August. I don't know whether time will get extended because today is not a working day in many places. But irrespective of whether time gets extended or not, the idea is not to catch people on the wrong foot. Ab tak aapne kyun nahi kiya? That's one part. Ab tak aapne kyun nahi kiya? More important part is the wake up call, beckon call कि अब तक नहीं चाहते हो तब चेंज जाओ. अगले क्वार्टर में अगर ऐसा सर्टिफिकेट मांगू तो you are able to give a fruitful SDD compliance certificate. I'm hoping that I mean, this interaction would at least help you to do a little better compliance with STD if you think that the last quarter was not all that well done. But I'm sure if you're a serious compliance officer, you would have done excellent compliance with STD. But let's I was told that my screen had stopped in between. I'm hoping it's been okay now, but fair enough. Vinita and Pemi, in whichever order you like to take it over, please feel free. But we would intend to do interaction with people because that's the most important part. So Vinita and Pemi, please decide your order and let's move
on. Good evening all. I hope I'm audible. Yes, okay. So I think the whole idea for us to get into this quick discussion with all of you was to first, of course, provide a background on this SDD requirement, which all of us are aware. But I found on several interactions that still people have this notion that, you know, certain companies, even though their securities are listed, they're not required to maintain an SDD. For example, a debt listed entity. But let's be very clear on that the PIT regulations are applicable on a company which has listed its securities, which also includes debt securities. So we all should be clear on that. I think myself and Vinita will be taking up questions here. And I think that is what all of you as participants who've joined on such a short notice would also want. So I think we can start having, you can put the questions on the chat box also. So I have a question from Nisha Sharma. So yes, the question is, mine is a debt listed company. Is SDD applicable to us? Because UPSI means it should be materially impacting the price upon becoming aware of it. I think that was the first thing that even I tried to address, that it's not that if your company is a debt listed company, there is no case of a UPSI affecting the prices. I think, Vinita, if you would like to throw some more light on that question.
Yes. So the fact that you have, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay. So the fact that I'm having the securities listed, so obviously there will be some set of information which can impact the prices of that securities. Of course, the list is longer when it comes to equity, and it may be a shorter list when it comes to listed debt. And that difference is also visible when we look at the material events under listing regulations, where what is material in case of debt securities, apart from the standard things defined in the meaning of UPSI, like financial results, change in capital structure, etc. What is also additionally important, if there is any event which is likely or relating to any potential default in the listed debt securities or in servicing the debt in the form of interest or repayment of principal. So therefore, these information also becomes very critical. For example, if I'm going through the liquidity or I'm going through the ALM reporting, and there is some feature or there is some indication that there are some stress situation where it is likely that the company may default in its payment obligations. And if I'm sharing this information, say with my debenture trustee or with my lenders, surely what I'm sharing is a potential UPSI, because if this comes in public domain, it will materially impact the price even of my listed debt securities, and therefore that will require an entry in the SDD. So presently, insider trading regulations, they do not exempt any kind of listed entities from the requirement of entering the data in the SDD. I hope, Neha, that answers your query. The next, sorry, Nisha. How we can consider that UPSI is not tamperable? It's not that the UPSI is not tamperable. We need to ensure that the entry that we do in the SDD should not be tamperable, which we discussed either through affixing DSE, or if we have a software which kinds of gives the access only to the compliance officer in a way it is locked that no one else is able to edit it, that will ensure that it remains tamper-proof. There is a query from Mr. Deepak that financial data flows to number of people in the company. So whether everyone is required to update SDD. And this is the point which you and Vinod sir discussed a few moments back, that the intent is not sharing of information among the DPs, because the DPs are supposed to be in possession of UPSI, but where there is a sharing with any non-DP or with outsider, that is the event which will trigger the requirement of entering into the STD. How will be the number of events required to be captured, be determined? Now, again, this is an important point because this confusion is again arising from the note which has been given in the format, which seems to indicate that the number of events should be the number of disclosures that the company has made to the stock exchange under Regulation 30. Whereas in our view, the events would be interpreted as the instances of sharing the UPSI with outsiders or with non-DPs. For example, if there is a financial results, I may share that information with the stat auditors. There may be some UPSI relating to the previous quarter, which is yet to be made generally available because it is still in the process of getting concretized. And in that case, also in that process, if there is any sharing of information, again, that would be another instance of sharing of UPSI. And therefore, we cannot limit to the number of disclosures that we make to the stock exchange. I think Pooja sir is also raising his hand. I think if the
And maybe
host can
participant
unmute,
may be
yes.
allowed to speak also. Yeah, he's
Yes.
speaking.
My question was on that number of events. See, if we are sharing results database of our tally records to auditor, that will be counted as an event. Then again, we are sharing the same things to internal auditors. That will be counted as a second event. So in this way, we can count the event.
Right, sir. Absolutely.
If we are flowing data to statutory auditors 3 or 4 times, that will be counted as a single event or multiple events.
That we can still, if there is a facility where we can at least record the period for which we are sharing, because if I'm saying they're doing the audit for the entire quarter, in that span of time till my results are finalized, there will be to and fro of information with the same person, and therefore recording, and I'll be sharing with the same person, maybe the partner or whoever is dealing with it, and each instance of sharing requiring an entry in the SDD will be perfunctory. So therefore, I can maybe specify the period. Yes.
Yeah, each time we are sharing, suppose 3 or 4 communications are there, that will be counted as four events.
With different
She's saying
persons.
one event.
One event.
With the stat auditor, for example, once,
Okay.
internal auditor once.
Okay.
I don't know anybody else. I think these are the people who have access to financial records. But let's say secretarial auditor provided access to minutes, which is obviously after the minutes have anyway gone public, so that may not be price sensitive actually.
In last quarter,
But
in last quarter, we were providing our secretarial auditors for secretarial audit.
But what I'm saying is the information which is in the minutes would have anyway gone public. So it's unlikely that there'll be anything price sensitive still, unpublished price sensitive still. But if there is, assuming that there is, the compliance officer can take a call that if there is unpublished information which is being shared even with the secretarial auditor, in our perception, there's nothing wrong in entering it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, Neetu, I think there is one more person, Mr. Milky Miriala, who has raised hand.
Hi, this is Mr. Milky Miriala. I am a company secretary for one of the battery manufacturers in India. I have a small query because currently while uploading the SDD certificate on BSC, there was a circular or a notification from BSC saying that this circular should be audited by the secretarial auditor or a PCS from next quarter and to be submitted within 21 days. So my thing is that as per the thing, for example. Hello?
Yes, we lost you in between. Yes.
Sorry. So my thing is that the moment the external secretarial auditor, if he is given access, assuming I have 4 UPSIs maintained at a particular time in this quarter, out of 4, only 2 are being disclosed to the public, another 2 are running over the next quarter. There need not be a trading window closure for every UPSI because the group might be a smaller group and the stakeholders might be a smaller group. So how does the secretarial auditor, do I need to share those 2 UPSIs also with the secretarial auditor to audit, or only those UPSIs which has been disclosed to the public?
Okay, Pammy, so maybe you may add where required. So here, firstly, what I'm entering in the SDD is not the actual details of the UPSI. I'm just giving a
Uh,
general classification that a UPSI has been shared.
Yes, but see, if you see, I have to give a name for the, I cannot say just a UPSI, assuming it's a merger, demerger, or some heading I have to give given.
Correct. So
And-
even if we write,
and-
suppose scheme of arrangement, I'm not intending to write whether it's a demerger or it's a merger or which is the entity.
Whatever scheme of arrangement, but see, secretarial auditors, have you seen that secretarial auditors are aware of entire minutes, they are aware of the internal discussions, what we capture in minutes. So the
Mhm.
secretarial auditor will be good enough for anyone who's auditing, is good enough to understand what the company is doing, whether it's a diversification or expansion organically or inorganically. They can easily judge it off. In that case, do I need to mention secretarial person is also having a UPSA access because he's auditing the for that?
That can be done because he will
Yes.
be not just referring the SDD, but maybe also asking some questions whether all entry has been made or not. So then in the quarter in which he's actually certifying, maybe that entry can be made.
So like we just mentioned, Vinita, that if information shared with other auditors may form part of SDD, I wouldn't like to say that secretarial auditor is an exception. If information which is sensitive in nature, unpublished information, material information, unpublished, it's shared with secretarial auditor, which is, frankly, in my view, that's very unusual. But like Mr. Milky says, if you're doing it, then just enter it in SDD. What is wrong in entering? But if the SDD has 10 entries, which it probably on a, I mean, better thinking may not have had, but you adding it, I don't want to burden the SDD with unfructuous information, a heap of information, which makes it completely unreadable. But I'm entering 2 items, which let's say on a logical region ought not have been there. We are simply adding 2 more entries, so there's nothing wrong in entering it.
Just to follow up, there's another query which I wanted to raise. Assuming that we are going to do some organization where we have added, created a UPSI group, all the internal finance and the CXOs are being given a part of the group. Also, we have added some 10 to 12 external consultants and agencies as the connected persons. And we all know that, I'm just giving an example where all these people work on a transaction. There'll be hundreds of mail shared by this and that. So when I'm creating a group and saying this, all people have access to UPSI, do I still need to record all the mails, transactions exchange between them, or it is enough one entry saying that these all people have access to UPSI called XYZ?
So this is possibly relating to a project. I mean, for
Yes.
example, the project would be, let's say, a preferential issue. It could be a project, let's say, pertaining to an acquisition or a due
Or
diligence.
maybe a
thing.
project issue, the rights issue, or whatever, where external parties, number of
preferential.
parties involved, or
Correct.
whatever.
So let's say there's a team of 15 people who will be working on a preferential issue, which has been formed internally. And we have noted down that this team of 15 people with their PAN details, etc., will be shared information pertaining to a potential issue of capital. That should suffice entering it once. Because thereafter, any information pertaining to that project will anyway be available to these people. So
Yes.
I'm hoping Ms. Milky,
So all the internal
Please,
communications between each of them need not be given.
that doesn't need to be shared.
Okay, even for this, so once if at the start of the project, I calibrated all the people who are involved in internal, external and insiders and give one mail. So means one entry for that entire project is sufficient as long as there is not any extension of the parties.
I would agree. Mr. Nitin Arora and Manish Tiwari, Nitinji or Manish, whichever.
Hello.
Manishji, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, this is Nitin.
Yes, Mr. Nitin, go ahead.
Yeah, so actually I was going through the format of the compliance certificate. The 4th point states that whether the recipients were upfront informed that the information which they will be receiving shortly is a UPSI and that the entry has been captured in the database prior to forwarding the UPSI data. So I went through the this PIT regulations. I could not find such a requirement as stipulated under these regulations, which is mentioned in this format of compliance certificate.
3/4 is there, no?
Yes,
3 by
point number
4.
4. Yes, yes.
Regulation 3, sub-regulation 4.
The question is that it's not upfront. It says the company should showcase a notice. In the regulation, it says should issue a notice to the person that it's a UPSI, but the certificate says upfront. So many people saying that before sharing, you have to inform the person that it has been shared.
That's logical, isn't it? Because unless told about the seriousness and sensitivity of the information that I'm receiving, I may not know. For the company knows that the company is sharing some proposal with me, which is serious, which is classified as price sensitive. So I should be told that, so that I mean, become careful. I don't share it randomly with colleagues, etc. So the determination has been done by the company. The company tells it to me if I am the recipient. I'm an outsider. I have received this information. So I should be told that the information is sensitive.
Yeah, there's one thing which I just wanted to know whether this comes as a qualify. So assuming if I am sharing information with some XYZ, having a disclaimer in the mail that the above information is UPSI and you're not requested to disclose or share, will that meet the compliance of this upfront intimation? Having a clear definition,
Vinita
not
and Pemi could contribute, but to my mind, I think regulation 3/4 is quite clear that I should actually give a confirmation that I will not disclose. Just one-sided communication from the company that I am sharing sensitive information, you are not supposed to pass it on. Vinita, you could probably.
And in practice also, first there is, when even we are onboarded, there is first an execution of the NDA and then the sharing of information happens.
Actually, Vinita, the thing is here that what you're talking about, the connected person, the consultants and all, I agree there's an engagement letter, NDA, and then sharing of information. I'm not worried about those. Assuming today my CFO shares information to the CXO. If CXO sees the numbers in certain particular business is low, the business head was not earlier never given any full access to the result, but now unknowingly my CFO forwards it to that or some dealer saying that this information, please explain. While asking for that, he'll give an information disclaimer saying that this is a price sensitive, I do not disclose, you are obliged to maintain secrecy. Because I cannot expect in the day-to-day thing when my CFO needs, for example, there's some clarification he wanted, he's sending it to some expert and informing that, because not every engagement is every person I engage or every opinion I take is documented with an NDA or something. In that
Mr.
case,
Milky Miller, thanks. I think we've got it. Sorry, I'm stopping in between because there are plenty of other hands going up as well. Sorry, and there's a time limitation because we'll at least I'll be off at 6:45. Quickly taking this question: if it's DP to DP within the company, designated person to designated persons, all insiders, I think there the code of conduct will take care of it. We don't need to go into NDAs internally within the company. The code of conduct should take care of it. Vinita, if you agree, then we can maybe move to the next question. I think we can move to the next question. Mr. Manish Tiwari and Nitin Arora, whichever way.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Good evening, everyone. So, sir, one quick question. Basically, I wanted to understand from which point onwards should we assume an information as a UPSI? Basically, there are many projects which senior people, they conceptualize, but they may not get materialized. So, should we start assuming exchange of information from the very grassroots level, or what should be the point or maybe formula to identify information as UPSI?
Vinita?
I'll answer that. Maybe as Sir had just discussed, that firstly, where we look at whether the information is concretizing towards UPSI or not. So if I'm, say, possibly talking about an acquisition, I'm just looking in which sector and whether it will be inorganic, which location, etc. I'm still in the research stage. But by the time I identify a target and I plan to do a binding term sheet or an MOU and then begin the due diligence, that is where the likelihood of going ahead with that deal will increase, or the probability of going ahead with that deal will increase. And that is the stage when I should be treating it as UPSI, because now I have a target. I'm working around, say maybe the consideration, etc., and the other nitty-gritties, and therefore that is the stage where if everything goes fine, then I may take it to the next level of placing it before the board for approval. So therefore, this would be the stage where you feel that yes, it is now the probability of going ahead with it is higher. In that case, you identify it as UPSI and then start closing the trading window for the DPs, and then thereafter, whatever is being shared, you enter in the SDD for outsiders.
Okay. So that means once we start exchanging formal communications, say like written agreements, then we can assume that to be UPSI.
Right.
And for financial results and dividend, these regular matters, since DPs are signing our code of conduct, like they are giving a declaration that we have read and understood code of conduct. So that would be sufficient enough, like an agreement to comply with regulation 3. We don't need any extra written agreement, right?
No, but is this you're asking in relation to sharing among the DPs? Because
yes.
DPs are anyways bound by the code of conduct.
Yes, amongst DP and when DPs they share with auditors or
So
other
where the
external
DPs
people
are
besides-
sharing with the external parties, in those cases, it will trigger the entry in STD. Where the DPs are sharing amongst themselves, as we said, that we hold a view that since they are deemed to be in possession of UPSI and they are already bound by the code of conduct and the regulations as well. So therefore, there is no need to execute an NDA separately, between the DPs and the.
Okay, thank you. That clarifies. Thank you, ma'am.
Mr. Pradeep Patwari?
Yes.
I'm audible.
You
Yes,
are.
yes.
Yes. My question regarding SDD format of SDD certificate, point number 12, is there is any other measures to be ensure non-temperability of the database? So what type of measures it want to take?
So here basically one is that who has the access to the STD, that also becomes a point, because the limited the access there is to the STD, of course, that the scope that anyone could log in and tamper also gets
Like
reduced.
as point number 11 also said that whether the database is not temperable. So see, if there is already confirmation, then why point number 12 is?
No, that is the database is non-tamperable, and then
Okay.
also we'll have to ensure that how is that access done? Who is having the access rights?
Okay, right.
Is
So
it
we need
shared
to-
with the
Yeah,
juniors?
so we need to mention here that who is able to
In a
temper
way, you
this,
are also having
what-
giving that details in the point number
Right.
4, because where the recipients, sorry, I think, and
point number 3.
3, I guess,
Yeah.
just a moment. Wherein you're supposed to give the point number 2, whether control exists as to who can access the SDD for read write along with names and PAN of such person. So that factual details is something I'm providing into. Then the regular confirmation in terms of the regulations, that if whether an audit trail is maintained, time stamping is done, I'm confirming in 9, 10, etc. So 12 is especially that if there is any other feature that you are ensuring, suppose you are using your DSE or you have some other internal controls to ensure the non-tamperability. It is in addition to that, whatever extra is being followed by the company to be specified.
Yeah,
in
so
the point.
if we fill in yes, then whatever we need to add the who will the add. I think there is, you want to say that who will add the entries in this, right?
Who is doing the entry, we are anyway specifying, but within that also whether, what is the control that only he will be able to access that,
Okay.
and that no one else will be able to access. Any other instance, if
Sort of
suppose.
an additional security feature by
Right.
virtue of which there's the tamperability is completely, one can say that you cannot tamper with the database at all. Maybe by reducing the access or maybe making it more password protected, or for adding some more security features to that.
Or say if it is attempted to be entered through some other IP address, or there is some security alert which is being thrown. So this will be again the features to just ensure that no one else apart from who is authorized enters the details in the STD or accesses the STD.
Okay, thank you.
Maybe we can take up the questions in the chat. Preeti's question is, what is the compliance requirement? Is it the CS required to give quarterly verification? I think one of the participants just mentioned that while uploading, it was intimated that this has to be now submitted on a quarterly basis within 21 days. So yes, now this becomes a quarterly or a regular compliance requirement, and this will be certified by the compliance officer. Here a point that I would want to mention, that it may be likely that all entries may not be made by the compliance officer. There may be some HODs or other functional heads who may also be authorized. So then it is also a matter of flow of information, what kind of confirmation the compliance officer would take from them to ensure that all the required entries were made in the STD. As the requirement is from NSE only, should we send the same to BSE? We understand that the respective exchanges where the securities are listed have emailed the same to their clients. So if you are listed on NSE only, then of course you will not be required to send it to BSE. We have received an email from BSE too. I think the option to upload would be there for both the exchanges. So likewise, the same certificate can be uploaded. Don't see a challenge in that. Mine is a debt listed company, but we don't have SDD as on date. Kindly let us know how can we submit the certificate. But Here we understand that if there are financial results, if it's a debt listed company, surely there is quarterly financial results which are required to be finalized. And if there are quarterly financial results, there would be limited review by the auditors. So in a way, yes, there has to be an instance of sharing which will require an entry in the SDD. We have there are participants who have raised hand, or maybe they can be unmuted.
Mr. Aziz Vanak, if you can unmute yourself.
Hello.
Yes, you're audible.
Hello. Yes, am I audible?
Yes.
you are.
Yes, ma'am. I understood the concept which Kothari sir has said, and I have read the FAQs also. So basically, we can maintain the database in Excel format also, and for the time stamping thing, we can attach the digital signature, right?
So you cannot maintain, and the entry can be made in Excel, but surely because there is no audit trail and it is tamperable, therefore we suggest that you convert it to PDF and fix the DSC as soon as the entry is made, so that each time you do that, there is again a trail maintained, and then that will be non-tamperable.
Oh, okay, understood, ma'am. But in the following quarters, it will on the practicing company secretary to certify the certificate. So the liability upon the practicing company secretary. So what if the company secretary don't rely on these records and force the company to do server and software to maintain the database? So in that case, what we should do?
Maybe then that is a call that the company will have to take if there is any specific reservation for not opting for a software. Like we said, of course, there is no preference on the form in which it is maintained, so long you are able to ensure compliance. So even if there is a query, that's the point that you will have to maybe explain that all the requirements of the circular or the regulations have been met, and therefore it cannot be said that this is not maintained in the required format.
Oh, thank you.
If the software is not all that expensive, may not be a bad idea to maybe have a software as well.
Hello.
Mr. Sushil Sharma, Mr. Aziz, I hope the question is taken care of.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Thanks. Mr. Sushil Sharma and
sir, about software.
There are many questions on the chat as well.
So sorry to interrupt.
Hi,
about the software,
yes.
the FAQ was mentioned, and SEBI is kind of holding a view that software should not be in place. Reason they are still providing login-based access, and they might have some.
Dheeraj, you are right, but SEBI is saying that it shouldn't be accessible by. I mean, the server is not an external server such that there is an access to somebody else. If the software is residing in my computer, there's no problem. I mean, it should be data protected, password protected, so that only I have an access. For example, my emails can be accessed by me, not Gmail cannot come and access my email. I'm using Gmail software, they cannot access my email. But so the idea basically is that it shouldn't be available for access to an external party. Otherwise, the whole integrity of inside information will go away.
Got it.
Mr. Sushil Sharma?
Yeah, thank you, sir. Am I audible?
Yes,
yeah,
you are.
thank you. Sir, just clarification again regarding the question which the Vinita has answered. Number one is there is a one event regarding the financial results, but the entry in respect of this has been made 5 times, whether we should count as a 5 or 1.
So that is for sharing. Yeah, that is for. So we said that if you're sharing with the same person multiple times, we can consider it as one event, because you're sharing it for that period, and there will be a number of sharing with the same person of the same organization. So it doesn't make sense when I'm, making the entry for each time that I share the information. So we said one person, the number of times I'm sharing, just make one entry. It's one person, one event. That is how we are calculating.
Okay, if I am sharing the same information with second person, then it would be 2 events, right?
Correct.
Right. Thank you. And another question is the point number 4 is asking for the entrance of the information in SDD before sharing. Is it mandatory under the law or certain because after making sharing the information, we can enter into SDD, okay, or a number of days, actually nowhere defined how much days would be required for the entry purpose.
I think the intent is just to ensure a better control, that as you're sharing, you carry out that entry in the SDD, so that the time of entry, everything is also captured, and it is evident that yes, you had first entered or promptly entered and then shared the information. There is nothing specific on the timeline bit in the law, but as regulation 3.4 also indicates, that you need to give that notice to the other person with whom you're sharing that it's a confidential information. So for obvious reasons, when that notice is being given, you will also parallelly enter it in the SDD, so that there is no miss on the part of the compliance officer subsequently.
Okay, ma'am.
Is there any defined format for maintaining SDD? I believe SEBI has not prescribed. SEBI has just prescribed the contents. There is a format, of course, I think in the ICSI guidance note, and we have also given a format in our FAQs as well. But there is no prescribed format. There's just minimum content that has been specified. This question of Mr. Pradeep, I think they've already answered. Dheeraj question, what about debt securities with fixed return, no price impact, even sharing of UPSI will not change the fixed return? Fixed return, Dheeraj, are you meaning, say, the fixed coupon rate? Because even for NCDs, the pricing fluctuates. So you can see the price at which it is being traded, it's never the constant. It's not at the par value, it is always fluctuating. So it cannot be said that there is no instance of, impacting the price. For example, if there is a likelihood of the company defaulting in the payment of interest or in the redemption of the principal amount, surely if this news breaks out, you can see the change in the price as well. So it's not that the price will remain unchanged.
Noted. Concern was that the amount of trading and price fluctuation, should both of them be considered for recording in the SDD?
No, that's not. If it's a likelihood, actually whether it is changing or not is not your concern. If there is a likelihood of that getting materially impacted, for example, if I'm going to default in the servicing of my debt obligation, surely for me, I know this will be a material impact. The fact whether it will, what is the extent of price change, that's not a concern. It's more of a subjective call that we'll be taking.
And when we do it on a private placement with a clause of, say, lock-in, which may, extend till the maturity itself. So we are making it virtually non-transferable. So trading is kind of prohibited in such structure. So even in then, those kind of situations, are we liable to record the sharing of such information regarding those NCDs in SDD?
Because it is still, say, assuming if there was no lock-in and if it could be traded, this information could have impacted the price. Say for equity also, you have such instance where the shares are under lock-in, but that doesn't mean that would not stop from disclosing those events which are in the nature of UPSI. So both are separate requirements, but if it is a listed security, surely it is likely to get impacted based on the UPSI.
Okay, thank you.
Then do we need to add consultant name in SDD software? So if you're sharing any kind of UPSI with the consultant, yes, that will be entered in the SDD software. FAQ says that we cannot take software from any vendor who is providing logins. Can we maintain the details in PDF in a fixed DSC? As DSC fixation is not possible in Excel sheets, we confirm that yes, that is one of the possible ways of maintaining the same. Information shared with subsidiary companies, auditors for audit needs to be captured for consolidation. I understand that for consolidation, the flow of information would be other way around, where I'll be receiving from the subsidiaries. Why will there be a need of holding companies sharing the UPSI relating to the results with the subsidiary with the auditors of the subsidiary?
Not exactly the entire financials, but yeah, certain transactions, they do ask for information on the pricing terms, the terms related to transactions. So all of that, of course, being still in the nature of UPSI. So those kind of data are still shared, not the entire financials, of course.
If that is the case, then yes, that will require an entry in SDD. Number of event captured is the number of UPSI recorded in quarter or number of entries made pertaining to such UPSI. The second one would be the correct one, Dimple, that the number of entries made pertaining to such UPSI, because you may share it with more than one person in relation to one UPSI. So therefore, that these were the number of events that required entry in SDD, and that is what you are confirming. Do we need to inform the designated person that this information is no longer UPSI? I believe that we anyways inform through by way of trading window closure and opening. So I don't think there is a specific need of informing that now this is no longer UPSI. Maybe Harsh, if you would want to explain the query better, maybe you can raise your hand so the host can unmute. Next is non-submission will lead to, that's an interesting question. Non-submission will lead to maybe violation of LODR because I'm not giving the information what stock exchange is asking. Surely it may also result in not providing the necessary information in terms of PIT regulations. So yes, it definitely leads to violation of SEBI regulations, which may result in issuing of a show cause and subsequently imposing of penalty. We assume because typically when any information is required, especially in relation to some compliance, that is a requirement on the part of the company to furnish the same. Sushil Sharma sir has a number of event captured is the number of UPSI recorded or number of entries. I think we already answered that. We are not maintaining SDD. How can I submit this certificate for the quarter? I'm not sure if you will be able to confirm that there were no instance of sharing of UPSI, because the one which is shared with the stat auditors for financial results is definitely that entry which is required to be made. Maybe you will have to say no and give the rationale and submit, because non-submission is not an option. Will SDD be liable to be updated even if we share financial results, annual report, etc. with vendors for publication designing? If the information is already generally available, because typically I share it with my vendors or for designing, etc. after it has gone in public domain. Dheeraj, if I understand that correctly.
No. Before, like we are internally preparing the annual reports, we are internally preparing the financial results. So before the board meeting itself, we share the financial results with the vendors because they have to prepare the format, they have to do the translations. They also have to send us back for, vetting of the content, the numbers, figures, etc. So this process entirely—
Very valid point. In that case, yes, that will require an entry in SDD. So even if you're sending it to the investor relations team for preparing the press release or designing for, for the PPT, for the analyst meet that follows, and if that information is before, that this becomes generally available, then yes, that will require an entry in the SDD.
But all these cases which are legitimate and required for the purpose of executing my business transactions, be it media release, be it these vendor sharing, be it sharing with the lender. Say suppose if I'm from a financial industry and I'm sharing it with my lenders regularly on a day-to-day basis, because they are we are bound
or
by
say person to any covenant in your loan agreement also.
Exactly.
If you want to periodically share the details, yes.
So are these still required? Because legitimate purpose, at least we can, we don't have to, or we have to.
We have to, because they become the fiduciaries who are obtaining UPSI in the ordinary course of their business, and you are providing it on a need basis.
Intermediaries, they have to update their own SDD, no?
That is when you share. So when you are sharing, you will enter in your SDD, and as per the SEBI FAQs, even there is a counter entry which will be made by the intermediary or the fiduciary at their end. That so and so UPSI has been shared with them. So as of now, the confirmation for compliance is only for the listed entity. It's not for the other side. But the requirement is two-way. The one who is sharing and the one who is receiving, both will maintain in the SDD format. And even if suppose there is an information which is shared with the fiduciary and they are, say, tied up with some, there is some kind of outsourcing, if they are further sharing for legitimate purpose from their end, in that case also they will have to do an entry in the SDD. That is where the requirement.
Actually, there's one instance which we encountered on this, but that will be hard to test. So generally, what I don't know others, but we are trying to practice that we put a declaration that this is UPSI and should not be further shared without the permission, at least to showcase whether it's legitimate or not. So because it's impossible to track. Look, we are contacting one ad agency. They might share our information with another freelancers, because it's a digital world. People are working with freelancers a lot. So definitely it will be
No,
traveling.
absolutely. Those clauses form part of your confidentiality agreements anyway. Next question is from Mr. PC. That
Vinita,
internal.
just a sec.
Yes.
Sorry, interrupting. On this question of Dheeraj, I have a different view. While the financial results or the annual reports are shared with any of the vendors, for example, financial results, at least in our organization, we don't share the data without the same being submitted to the exchange. We share the format that is being finalized, and the numbers are put once we submit the results to the exchange. So similarly, on the annual report also, the annual report printing or the information to the vendor for the at least the data part is already only given after the results have been made public to the exchange. So well, in that case also an entry has to be made in the STD, although the entire financial statement would not be available in the public domain. But since the results are already there, so which consists of your PLN and balance sheet as an abridged format, so whether that also requires an entry.
Even here, I want to add one question, whether director's report, which is not yet out in public domain, if that is also shared with the vendors for layouting and designing purpose, MD&A statement, whether for that also entry will
What could be
required?
the kind of UPSI that would be carrying?
Exactly, because that would be basically the PNL and the balance sheet, which is already submitted to the exchange as part of your results submission. So it would of course have a detailed presentation on
Right,
the
because the notes to
financials.
accounts would not be
Exactly.
there in the
But
results.
the eventual profit and loss, which is the main concern, is already there in the domain. So will that also qualify as an entry into the STD?
Because here also one of the concern would be, what if there is a qualification in the auditor's report which may not reflect in the regulation 33(1), but which is there in the other one, which has the CARO, etc.
Yeah,
which may have a,
but in case if that has a material price impact, that would
Right.
form part of your 33 or a 52 audit report as well.
Okay. In that case, if you're saying that, okay, once I have given my financial results, it's already in public domain. Thereafter, if I'm sharing, say, the financial statements and the related documents that form part of my annual report, if I'm sharing and there is no element of UPSI in that, because whatever was the price sensitive portion has already become generally available. In that case, yes, thereafter what we are sharing need not be entered in the STD.
Okay, thank you.
Internal audit is a continuous process. Even staff of internal auditor team have full access of whole information of the company on day-to-day basis, how to record it in SDD structure. So they would be in auditing particular areas which are given by the audit committee as a part of the internal audit plan. But technically, if they are having access to all the information, certainly I cannot classify them as a DP. But if that is the level of access that they are having, and they can get this information through frequently communicating with the DPs, I believe then during the audit process that they are carrying out, that entry will have to be made in the STD. Otherwise, it will be very difficult to then track if they share any kind of UPSI with outsiders. If you have any other.
Yeah, I would just like to add here, while this is totally understandable that the internal auditors are engaged for the entire year, but saying that they are in receipt or they have access to UPSI per se, they have access to information, there's no doubt about it. But if I'm saying that during this process of information flow, UPSI is also shared with them, then yes, for the period or for the quarter ended, there has to be an entry which is to be made once whenever the quarter starts. And one needs to put in what is the nature of the UPSI that may be shared with them. Otherwise, if it's a natural flow of information wherein, the normal operations, etc., are being shared, which of course any auditor will need, I don't see any requirement of an entry in the SDD in that case.
And it may also not be a case where the entire team is having access to all information, because typically the level of information which may be shared with juniors would be different as opposed to maybe the partners or the senior level people in the audit team. So as the discussions and information is shared in the increasing order of seniority, maybe that would be more in the nature of UPSI, and there is where you will have to ensure that the entry is made in the STD. And then it will be their responsibility to ensure that that is not again, leaked or passed within the team, or when as a fiduciary, that would be their responsibility. Who will make entry in SDD while UPSI is with any person but not with the compliance officer? This is again a cause of concern because it is quite likely that there may be some potential UPSI which is being discussed, say in a department or between a DPs, of which compliance officer is not aware about. But again, when we talk about the internal control systems, the flow of information, because you are, as an annual event, you're also making the audit committee to confirm that yes, there are internal controls that are those are functioning effectively. And this is also one of those internal controls that if there is any UPSI floating in the organization, how that flow of information happens to the compliance officer? Because if he's not the person to know about it, then the entry cannot be made in the STD. Alternatively, either the access of SDD could be given to 2-3 persons so that if the CEO, compliance officer is not involved, then the next person who is responsible should make an entry. But going forward, given this format, which is to be signed by the compliance officer, certainly companies would have to now consider that whether at all it would be a prudent call where the compliance officer would not be involved, especially when he's the one who is certifying that all the entries and all the events have been recorded in the STD. Whether details of secretarial auditor is to be entered in the STD. Presently in the format, it has not been stated, but I believe that we've also been shared with some ICSI requests wherein they are maybe representing on the timelines, and I'm not sure if the format as well. So maybe this we'll have to see for the next quarter if there is any change in the format with some additional information. If they're saying that this has to be certified by the secretarial auditor, certainly the certification details or maybe a separate report or something will have to be annexed. So maybe we can see on the format. I'm assuming BSE may be sharing something on those lines. I think these are the queries on the chat box. If there are any other additional queries on YouTube or which the host may want to highlight, then maybe
there are certain questions on the YouTube, but I think most of them are similar to the ones which you've already addressed. For example, if there was no event required, then is nil report also required to be submitted? Now, this is something, even if there was no entry, you will have to at least state that there was nothing. Because it's very unlikely for a listed company for not even having a UPSI containing the financial results.
And that would be, say, the minimum entry which every company would be having. So a nil return is something which does not seem to be a likelihood. Maybe, anyways, these questions we have taken and the other questions as well, we'll be updating in the FAQs and circulating shortly. If there are any further questions, our email IDs are always there in public domain. Maybe you can write to us and we can include that as well in the STD, in our FAQs, and we'll be broadcasting that shortly. So I think we can bring the session to a close. Thank you everyone for your time, and thank you for joining at such short notice. It was quite a useful deliberation and definitely a learning for us as well. We will be putting across the presentation as well as the FAQs. Thank you for your time.
Thank you everyone. Thank you.